When my grandmother suddenly started giving away her cherished possessions, none of us recognized what she already sensed, that her time was limited. 6 months later, she was gone, and I found myself wishing I had understood what her actions were trying to tell us. The reality is that our bodies often know when the end of life is approaching, and they send subtle signals that, if recognized, can help families prepare emotionally, ensure proper care, and most importantly, make the most of precious remaining time. Today, I'm sharing 5 critical signs that medical research has identified as potential indicators that an elderly person may be in their final year of life. This isn't about creating fear or anxiety, but about providing knowledge that allows for meaningful conversations, appropriate medical care, and the chance to address what matters most before it's too late. End-of-life trajectories in the elderly are often misunderstood. While some conditions lead to a clear terminal phase, many older adults experience a more gradual decline that includes subtle but significant changes in physical function, social engagement, and even psychological awareness. Recognizing these patterns can be enormously beneficial, yet most families lack the framework to interpret what they're seeing. According to research from the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, approximately 70% of families report they wish they had recognized their loved ones' decline sooner, which would have allowed for different care decisions, important conversations, and more meaningful final interactions. What makes this topic particularly challenging is that many end-of-life indicators aren't dramatic medical events, but quiet changes in day-to-day functioning that can be easily attributed to normal aging or temporary setbacks. The line between normal aging and approaching life's end isn't always clear, but research has identified patterns that can help distinguish between the two. I want to emphasize that these signs aren't absolute predictions. Many people exhibiting some of these indicators will stabilize or even improve with proper intervention. However, when multiple signs appear together, especially in someone of advanced age or with existing chronic conditions, they warrant attention and possibly a different approach to care and family priorities. Today, I'll share 5 evidence-based indicators identified through longitudinal studies of elderly populations. For each sign, I'll explain what medical research tells us about its significance, how to distinguish it from normal aging changes, and most importantly, how to respond appropriately if you notice it in someone you love. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of these subtle warnings, which can help guide difficult but necessary family conversations and ensure that final months or years align with your loved one's wishes and values. Before we explore these 5 signs in detail, I want to emphasize something important. The 5th sign we'll discuss is perhaps the most overlooked yet powerful indicator, one that research shows appears in over 80% of cases where elderly individuals are in their final year, but that families frequently misinterpret or dismiss. Throughout this video, I'll also share specific questions you can ask healthcare providers when you notice these signs, as well as conversation starters that can help families address difficult topics with compassion and clarity. These practical tools can transform uncertainty into meaningful action. Stay with me until the end, because I'll also cover the 3 most common mistakes families make when they notice these changes, and how avoiding these pitfalls can lead to more peaceful end-of-life experiences for everyone involved. Now, let's begin with the first sign that medical research has linked to potential end-of-life transitions. The first significant indicator that an elderly person may be in their final year is what geriatricians call the trajectory of slowing, a progressive decline in physical functioning that doesn't recover with rest or treatment. Marie noticed her 87-year-old father's walking speed had dramatically decreased over several months. He used to walk slowly but steadily, she explained. Then he needed a cane, then a walker, and within 6 months he struggled to move from his bed to a chair. Each time we thought he'd stabilize at a new normal, another decline would follow. Marie didn't realize this pattern of cascading physical losses is one of the strongest predictors of approaching end of life. Here's why this matters. Research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association followed over 2,000 older adults and found that progressive mobility loss following a distinct pattern, walking speed decreases, then difficulty with stairs, then trouble rising from a chair, then bed mobility problems, was associated with a 73% likelihood of mortality within 12 months when it occurred in someone over 80 with chronic conditions. What distinguishes this from normal aging is the pattern of successive losses without periods of stability or improvement. Normal aging typically involves gradual changes with plateaus lasting months or years. The end-of-life trajectory, by contrast, shows a stair-step pattern of decline where each new stability level lasts progressively shorter periods before another drop occurs. The impact of missing this sign can be significant. Families often continue pursuing aggressive therapies aimed at restoration, when comfort care might be more appropriate. They postpone important conversations, assuming there will be more time when dad gets stronger, and they may miss the opportunity to address mobility limitations with appropriate assistive devices that could enhance quality of remaining life. Ask yourself, has your loved one experienced multiple functional declines within the past 6 to 12 months? Does each recovery reach a lower baseline than before? Has their walking speed noticeably decreased even when they're having a good day? If you recognize this pattern, consider scheduling a comprehensive geriatric assessment with a physician experienced in end-of-life care. Ask specifically, given these progressive mobility changes, what time frame should we be thinking about? And how can we best prepare for the next changes we might see? Appropriate responses include shifting from restorative to maintenance physical therapy, making environmental modifications to accommodate decreased mobility, considering palliative care consultation, and beginning conversations about preferences for future medical interventions. As Marie later reflected, had I understood what his body was telling us, we would have spent less time at medical appointments and more time simply being together, doing what brought him joy in the mobility he still had. The second sign that an elderly person may be approaching their final year is what nutritionists and hospice professionals call the appetite arc. Significant, persistent changes in eating habits and relationship with food. Robert noticed his 91-year-old mother, formerly an enthusiastic eater, had started pushing food around her plate rather than eating it. At first, we thought it was the retirement community's cooking, he explained. We brought her favorite foods from home, but she'd take 2 bites and say she was full. Then she stopped showing interest in meals altogether. We were frustrated trying to get her to eat until her doctor helped us understand what was happening. Here's why this matters. A study in the Journal of Nutrition, Health and Aging found that unintentional weight loss of 5% or more over 6 to 12 months, combined with decreased interest in eating, was associated with a 64% increased risk of mortality within the following year for nursing home residents. This pattern often begins subtly, with changes in food preferences, smaller portions, and decreased pleasure in eating, before progressing to more obvious reduced intake. What distinguishes this from normal aging changes or temporary illness is its progressive nature and the lack of hunger despite weight loss. Normal aging may involve changing taste preferences or slightly smaller portions, but the basic enjoyment of eating typically remains intact. Temporary illness usually involves a period of poor appetite, followed by return to baseline eating patterns. The impact of misunderstanding. This sign can lead to unnecessary suffering on both sides. Families often engage in stressful battles over food, trying to coax, persuade, or even force elderly loved ones to eat for their health, not recognizing that the body is naturally reducing intake as systems begin shutting down. This can create tension during what should be a peaceful time. Ask yourself, has your loved one's interest in food significantly decreased over recent months? Have they lost weight without trying? Do they consistently leave meals mostly uneaten? Have they begun to express that eating feels like work rather than pleasure? If you notice this pattern, consider consulting with a palliative care physician or geriatrician who can explain the natural changes in appetite at end of life. Ask specifically, is this appetite change something we should try to reverse? Or is it a natural part of the aging process for someone in my loved one's condition? Appropriate responses include shifting focus from nutritional quantity to quality, offering small portions of favorite foods without pressure, providing frequent sips of fluids if accepted, and most importantly, finding non-food ways to show care and connection rather than making meals a battleground. As Robert eventually learned, Once we stopped focusing on making Mom eat and instead sat with her, held her hand, and shared family stories during mealtimes, our last months together became peaceful again. Food had been our battleground, but it became our gathering place even when she ate almost nothing. The third sign that often emerges in an elderly person's final year is a distinct pattern of social withdrawal combined with what gerontologists call the inward gaze, a shifting of attention from external activities to internal reflection. James described changes in his 84-year-old wife's social patterns. Eleanor had always been the social planner, calendar filled with lunches, book club, church activities. Then gradually she started declining invitations. When friends visited, she'd engage briefly, then tire quickly. She began spending hours looking through old photos and telling stories from decades ago. It seemed like she was somewhere between past and present. This transition wasn't depression, Asher Doctor initially thought, but a natural reorientation that often occurs near life's end. Here's why this matters. Research from the archives of gerontology and geriatrics, analyzing behavioral changes before death, found that increased social selectivity combined with greater interest in reminiscence was present in 67% of elderly subjects in their final year. This pattern typically begins with declining interest in superficial social connections, while maintaining closer relationships, decreased engagement with current events or future planning, and increased reflection on life review. What distinguishes this from depression or dementia is the person's comfort with the withdrawal and their clear engagement with significant relationships and meaningful memories. Unlike depression, there's often no distress about the social narrowing. Unlike dementia, the reminiscence is purposeful and connected rather than confused. The impact of misinterpreting this sign can lead to inappropriate interventions. Families may push for antidepressants, force unwanted socialization, or become frustrated by their loved ones' decreased interest in activities or current events, not recognizing that this inward turning serves important psychological purposes in life completion. Ask yourself, has your loved one shown decreasing interest in social gatherings they previously enjoyed? Do they tire quickly during visits? Have they become more reflective about their life story? Do they seem focused on resolving or making sense of past relationships or experiences? If you notice this pattern, consider consulting with a geriatric psychologist or palliative care specialist who understands end-of-life transitions. Ask specifically, could these social changes be part of a natural life review process rather than depression? Appropriate responses include creating space for life review by asking open questions about the past, recording or documenting their stories if they're open to it, facilitating connections with the few people who remain most important to them, and respecting their need for increased solitude without forcing unwanted socialization. As James came to understand, what looked like withdrawal was actually Eleanor completing her life's work of relationship and meaning-making. When we stopped trying to pull her attention outward and instead joined her in reflection, we had some of the deepest conversations of our 60-year marriage. She was preparing and inviting us to prepare too. The fourth sign that often appears in an elderly person's final year involves significant changes in sleep-wake patterns and energy rhythms, what sleep specialists call circadian breakdown. Linda noticed concerning changes in her 89-year-old mother's sleep patterns. Mom started sleeping more during the day, dozing off mid-conversation, but then she'd be awake and confused at night. Sometimes she'd have brief periods of unexpected clarity and energy followed by profound fatigue. The retirement home staff suggested a sleep aid, but something told me this wasn't ordinary insomnia. Linda was observing a pattern frequently seen in the final months of life. Here's why this matters. Research published in the Journal of Palliative Medicine documented that disruption of normal sleep-wake cycles, particularly increased daytime sleeping and nighttime wakefulness, occurred in 78% of elderly patients in their final 3 months of life. This pattern often includes a phenomenon called terminal restlessness, alternating with periods of significant lethargy. What distinguishes this from normal aging changes in sleep is its progressive nature and the dramatic swings between states. Normal age-related sleep changes tend to be relatively stable, somewhat less nighttime sleep, perhaps a regular afternoon nap. The end-of-life pattern typically shows increasing daytime sleep duration, greater difficulty distinguishing night from day, and the sundowning phenomenon, where confusion increases in late afternoon or evening. The impact of missing this sign often leads to inappropriate medication. Families and even healthcare providers may treat these changes as simple sleep disorders with sedatives or sleep aids, which can actually increase confusion and prevent important end-of-life interactions. They may also miss the opportunity to use periods of greater alertness for meaningful connection. Ask yourself, has your loved one's sleep pattern changed dramatically in recent months? Are they sleeping for extended periods during the day? Do they experience periods of nighttime confusion or restlessness? Have you noticed unpredictable fluctuations between alertness and profound fatigue? If you recognize this pattern, consider consulting with a palliative care physician rather than a sleep specialist. Ask specifically, could these sleep changes be related to end-of-life processes rather than a treatable sleep disorder? And how can we best respond to these changing rhythms? Appropriate responses include adapting your visit schedule to your loved one's periods of greater alertness, creating calming nighttime environments without forcing sleep, using gentle reassurance rather than reorientation during confused periods, and recognizing that increased sleep is often the body's natural way of beginning to disconnect. As Linda eventually realized, once we understood Mom wasn't just having sleep problems, but was showing us something more significant, we stopped trying to fix her schedule and started working with it. We had our most important conversations during her alert moments, regardless of what time it was, and we learned to sit peacefully with her during the in-between times, just being present. The fifth and perhaps most powerful sign that an elderly person may be in their final year is what hospice nurses often call the knowing, a person's own awareness and acceptance of their approaching death, often communicated indirectly through words, actions, or decisions. Thomas described how his 93-year-old father began putting his affairs in order. Dad started giving away his prized possessions with specific instructions about who should have what. He began telling us where important papers were located. He refused treatments he'd previously accepted without question. He started saying things like, "I won't be here next spring," very matter-of-factly. We thought he was being pessimistic, but he knew something we didn't want to see. Here's why this matters. A landmark study in the New England Journal of Medicine found that over 80% of elderly patients demonstrated some awareness of approaching death through behavioral changes or direct statements in their final year, often before receiving any terminal diagnosis. This phenomenon appears across cultures and education levels, suggesting it may be an innate human awareness rather than a cultural construction. What makes this sign particularly significant is that it often appears despite healthcare providers not having explicitly discussed prognosis. Many elderly people demonstrate a form of bodily wisdom, an intuitive understanding of their own mortality timeline that can be remarkably accurate. The impact of dismissing these communications can be profound. Families often unintentionally shut down important conversations by reassuring loved ones, "Don't talk that way, or you'll be fine," missing the opportunity for meaningful closure. Healthcare decisions may continue on autopilot without reflection on whether they align with the person's changing priorities. Ask yourself, has your loved one started giving away meaningful possessions? Are they making statements about not being present for future events? Have they begun refusing treatments they previously accepted? Are they putting affairs in order with unusual attention to detail? Have they started saying goodbye in subtle ways? If you notice these patterns, consider them invitations to important conversations rather than signs of giving up. Instead of redirecting or reassuring, try asking open questions. What are you thinking about these days? Or, is there anything you're concerned about that we haven't discussed? Appropriate responses include listening without contradicting their perceptions, creating space for important conversations about values and preferences, documenting specific wishes, facilitating meaningful goodbyes with important people, and supporting their autonomy in treatment decisions, even when these involve declining interventions. As Thomas reflected later, Dad was trying to prepare us, but we kept shutting down the conversation because we weren't ready to hear it. Once we started listening, he was able to tell us exactly what he wanted and didn't want in his final months. Following his lead gave him peace, and ultimately gave us peace too. He knew, and he needed us to know that he knew. As we've explored, these 5 signs the trajectory of physical slowing, significant changes in appetite and eating patterns, social withdrawal and the inward gaze, disruptions in sleep-wake rhythms, and the person's own awareness and acceptance, we can see that the body and mind often provide meaningful signals when life is drawing to a close. Recognizing these patterns isn't about surrendering hope or abandoning appropriate medical care. Instead, this awareness allows for a conscious transition from a focus primarily on extending life to one that emphasizes quality of life and meaning during the time that remains. The most common mistake families make when noticing these signs is interpreting them as problems to be fixed rather than changes to be understood. This often leads to unnecessary interventions that may actually diminish the quality of final months. The research is clear that when families recognize and respond appropriately to these indicators, several positive outcomes emerge, more meaningful. Conversations occur, unnecessary suffering from aggressive treatments often decreases, and both the elderly person and their loved ones report greater peace and preparedness when death eventually comes. While acknowledging mortality is never easy, having these frameworks to understand what you're seeing can transform a time of confusion and crisis into a period of meaningful connection, appropriate care decisions, and even profound growth for everyone involved. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Death is the side of life that is turned away from us." These signs help us begin to turn toward it with greater understanding and grace. If you found this information valuable, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit. Understanding these subtle warnings can help many families navigate this challenging but important life transition. In the comments below, I'd welcome hearing your experiences with recognizing these signs in your loved ones, or questions you may have about interpreting changes you're currently witnessing. Your shared wisdom might help another viewer facing similar circumstances. For those currently caring for an elderly loved one showing these signs, we've created a free downloadable guide called Meaningful Conversations Near Life's End, with specific question prompts and communication techniques. You'll find the link in the description below. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified when we release our upcoming video on creating a circle of care for end-of-life support. Thank you for your attention to this important topic. With awareness comes the possibility of turning difficult transitions into meaningful moments of connection and peace.